The global political economy is undergoing a structural reordering, shifting the world away from decades of unipolar dominance. This transition depends on an immense foundational base of physical manufacturing, infrastructure, and industrial capacity. The primary organizational vehicle for this new economic mass is the expanded BRICS Plus bloc, which now incorporates nations from across the global south. Measuring global power through nominal GDP often obscures true industrial capacity, as it focuses heavily on financialized services and fluctuating exchange rates. A more accurate assessment of sovereign production capabilities relies on Purchasing Power Parity, or PPP, which measures what an economy can physically produce and build within its own borders. This data reveals a definitive shift in economic mass, with the physical output of BRICS Plus nations surpassing the legacy powers of the G7. The BRICS Plus bloc now commands over 41% of global GDP, while the G7 represents approximately 30%. This concentration of industrial power acts as a gravitational pull for developing nations, providing a viable alternative for trade and capital investment. By securing the majority share of physical production, the Global South has established the foundation required to construct a parallel international architecture. During the unipolar era, the international financial system relied almost entirely on the US dollar. This system required every major transaction to pass through specific Western intermediary banks and clearinghouses. These administrative nodes eventually became tools of geopolitical statecraft, allowing Western powers to exercise financial weaponization against targeted states. Coercion often begins with exclusion from the SWIFT messaging system, which effectively blinds a nation's ability to process international payments. A more severe measure involves the unilateral freezing of sovereign central bank assets held within Western jurisdictions. These mechanisms act as bottlenecks, blocking the flow of trade and neutralizing a nation's ability to access its own reserves. These actions have had a profound effect on the rest of the Global South, highlighting the vulnerability of the entire network. For non-Western states, the use of asset freezes demonstrated the unacceptable risk of relying exclusively on dollar-denominated financial infrastructure. Decisive de-dollarization has transitioned from a theoretical ambition into a practical requirement for national survival. Constructing a sanction-resistant financial network requires an immense engineering effort to build parallel plumbing. The first mechanical solution is the expansion of local currency trade settlement, which establishes direct bilateral connections between trading partners. Nations are now settling energy and commodity trades using yuan, ruble, and rupee dirham pairs. Direct settlement allows trade to flow without entering U.S. intermediary clearing channels. A second mechanism is the New Development Bank, which provides a sovereign alternative to Western lending institutions. The New Development Bank prioritizes funding physical growth in emerging economies, focusing on the construction of tangible infrastructure. By issuing loans in local currencies, the bank insulates economies from exchange rate volatility while bypassing the structural adjustment mandates typical of the IMF. The third mechanical solution utilizes the technological integration of central bank digital currencies. Systems like Project mBridge utilize cross-border digital ledgers to process instantaneous settlements between central banks. This digital architecture is structurally decentralized, making it immune to unilateral foreign sanctions. Together, these mechanisms engineer a financial network capable of operating entirely outside hegemonic control. A sovereign financial network requires a corresponding diplomatic framework to organize its members. Beijing has introduced the 4 global initiatives to serve as the institutional superstructure for this multipolar order. The first pillar is the Global Development Initiative, or GDI. The scale of these projects demonstrates that the Global Development Initiative functions as an operational reality, with over $23 billion deployed across 1,800 projects. GDI funding is provided through state-to-state agreements, avoiding the privatization demands and political conditionalities often found in Western aid packages. The second and third pillars are the Global Security and Global Civilization initiatives. These frameworks replace the binary narrative of democracies versus autocracies with the principle of indivisible security and mutual respect for domestic governance. The final pillar, the Global Governance Initiative, advocates for reforming international bodies to reflect the demographic and economic weight of the Global South. These initiatives systematically remove the requirement for ideological alignment, replacing it with a framework of structural sovereign development. Western analysis often overlooks the actual function of the BRICS Plus framework, which operates independently of the rigid structures found in military alliances like NATO. For decades, Western foreign policy has operated under a framework described as the rules-based international order. Much of the Global South views this as an informal arrangement that Western powers selectively enforce to maintain their own primacy. The stated legal objective of the Multipolar Coalition is to re-anchor international governance strictly within objective international law. This framework prioritizes Article 2 of the United Nations Charter, which guarantees sovereign equality and absolute non-interference in the internal affairs of other states. This coalition advocates for the prohibition of unilateral economic sanctions and coercion that lack proper authorization from the UN Security Council. Respecting cultural diversity in this context means accepting that sovereign nations possess the right to choose their own paths of domestic economic and political governance. The movement toward multipolarity provides the physical and financial engineering required to finally enforce international law equally across every sovereign state.